I froze when I saw my husband secretly sprinkle a strange white powder into my food. I pretended not to notice, hiding my fear behind a smile. Then he laughed and whispered, "She will never know." But what he did not realize was that I had already started investigating. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and I am a senior wealth management advisor here in Atlanta. Up until tonight, I thought I had the perfect marriage to match my perfect life. Jamal and I have been married for 4 years. He is 35, a charismatic investment broker, and the kind of man who commands attention in every room he enters. We live in a sprawling modern mansion in Buckhead, the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta real estate. From the outside, we are the ultimate power couple in our elite social circle. We attend all the right galas, we donate to all the right charities, and we host the most exclusive dinner parties. But standing in the shadowed hallway just off our gourmet kitchen, the pristine illusion of my flawless life shatters into a million jagged pieces. I am adjusting my dress when I catch his reflection in the antique gilded mirror hanging on the corridor wall. Jamal thinks I am still upstairs touching up my makeup. He is humming a cheerful rhythm and blues tune, pouring creamy seafood pasta into our expensive porcelain dinner plates. Then his hand dips into his tailored suit jacket. He pulls out a small clear glass vial. My breath catches in my throat. I watch completely paralyzed as my loving, devoted husband unscrews the cap and shakes a heavy dusting of white powder directly into my portion of the pasta. He takes a silver spoon and carefully folds the rich sauce over the powder, masking it completely from sight. A low, chilling chuckle escapes his lips. "She will never know," he whispers to the empty room. A cold wave of pure terror washes over my entire body. My pulse pounds in my ears like a heavy war drum. Why is the man I sleep next to every single night poisoning my dinner? I force myself to breathe deeply, suppressing the primal instinct to run screaming out the front door and down the driveway. Running means losing. Running means giving up the massive empire I have built and inherited. Instead, I plaster on my best, most radiant smile, smooth down the fabric of my silk dress, and step out of the shadows into the bright, warm light of the kitchen. "It smells absolutely divine in here, baby," I say, keeping my voice light and entirely normal. Jamal spins around, flashing that brilliant $1 million smile that first made me fall in love with him. "Only the best for my queen," he says, picking up the 2 plates. "Come sit down. You have had a grueling week and I want to spoil you tonight." He leads the way into our formal dining room. The massive mahogany table is set perfectly with our best silver. The crystal chandelier casts a warm, inviting glow over us. Jamal places the poisoned plate directly in front of me. He takes the clean plate for himself and sits across from me. He folds his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. His dark, handsome eyes lock onto mine. He is staring at me with an intensity that makes my skin crawl. He is waiting. He wants to watch me take that first deadly bite. The tension in the air is thick, suffocating, and heavy with unspoken malice. "Eat up, Nia," Jamal urges, his voice dripping with fabricated concern. "You really need your strength. You have been so incredibly forgetful and stressed out ever since you took over your late father's commercial real estate empire. You are carrying too much weight on those beautiful shoulders. You need to relax." There it is, the setup. He is laying the groundwork for his trap. My father passed away 8 months ago, leaving me sole ownership of a massive portfolio of commercial properties across downtown Atlanta. These are prime retail and office spaces worth tens of millions of dollars. Ever since the will was read, Jamal has been making subtle, undermining comments about my memory, my stress levels, and my mental capacity. He has been planting seeds of doubt in my mind and in the minds of our friends. Now the pieces of the puzzle are slamming together with terrifying clarity. He does not want a divorce because a prenuptial agreement protects my assets. He wants total control of my inheritance, and he needs me legally incapacitated to get it. I look down at the creamy pasta. Death or madness is swimming in that rich garlic sauce. I look back up at my husband. I need a distraction, and I need it right now. "You are so right, Jamal." I sigh, letting my shoulders slump to play the part of the exhausted, overwhelmed wife. Managing all those corporate leases and dealing with the legacy board members has my brain completely fried. I really am losing my mind lately. But you know what would make this perfect dinner even better? That vintage Cabernet we brought back from our anniversary trip to Napa Valley. It is exactly what I need to unwind tonight. Jamal hesitates. His eyes flick down to my plate, then back to my face. He wants me to eat the food right this second. I can pour you a glass of the Merlot we already have open on the counter, he suggests quickly. No, I say, pouting playfully. I really want the Cabernet. Please, baby. My dress is entirely too tight for me to reach the top shelf of the wine cellar. You are so much taller and stronger. Do it for me. Jamal cannot refuse without breaking his carefully crafted character of the doting, supportive husband. He forces a smile and pushes his chair back. Anything for you, my love. I will be right back. Do not wait for me. Go ahead and start eating your food. I will, I promise cheerfully. The exact moment, his back disappears around the corner, and I hear his heavy footsteps descending the hardwood stairs into the basement wine cellar. My casual demeanor evaporates entirely. I move with lightning speed. I grab my plate, slide it swiftly across the smooth mahogany surface to his side of the table, and pull his clean plate over to my placemat. I quickly rearrange the silverware and the napkins to make the setup look completely untouched. The silent plate swap takes less than 4 seconds. I sit back down, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I pick up my fork, twirl a large portion of the safe pasta, and wait. A minute later, Jamal emerges from the basement, proudly holding the dusty bottle of Cabernet. He walks back into the dining room and stops dead in his tracks. A look of pure, unadulterated triumph washes over his face when he sees me chewing a huge bite of my dinner. Oh, this is absolutely incredible, Jamal. I say, taking another bite to prove my point. You really outdid yourself tonight. You have to eat yours before it gets completely cold. Jamal practically glows with dark satisfaction. He uncorks the wine, pours us each a generous glass, and sits down. I am so glad you like it, Nia. I made it with extra love tonight. He picks up his fork and digs into the plate I slid over to his side. He eats the pasta eagerly, completely unaware that he is consuming his own toxic creation. We sit there for the next 45 minutes chatting about mundane things. I complain about the terrible traffic on Peachtree Street. He talks about a new high-net-worth investment client he is trying to land at his brokerage firm. Every few minutes I watch him closely, waiting for the effects of whatever chemical he put in that food to take hold. I keep my smile bright and engaging, masking the cold calculation churning in my brain. I match his fake energy flawlessly. Then it begins. Jamal. He blinks rapidly, shaking his head, as if trying to clear a sudden overwhelming fog. He sets his fork down heavily on the table. Wow, he mutters, his speech suddenly slurred and slow. I just got a massive headache out of nowhere. Are you okay, baby? I ask, my voice dripping with the exact same fake concern he showed me earlier. Yeah, I am fine, he says, but his dark eyes are struggling to focus on my face. He rubs his temples vigorously with both hands. Just tired, I guess. It has been a long day at the office. I might just need to lie down for a second. Jamal tries to push his chair back and stand up, but his legs buckle immediately beneath him. His knees hit the hardwood floor with a loud, painful thud. He grabs the edge of the dining table, gasping for air, but his grip fails. His eyes roll back into his head. He crashes onto the plush living room rug, completely unresponsive. I do not scream. I do not rush to his side to check his pulse. I do not pull out my phone to call an ambulance. I slowly wipe my mouth with my linen napkin, place it neatly on the table, and stand up. I walk over to where my husband lies comatose on the expensive rug. I look down at his handsome, lifeless face. The betrayal burns hot in my chest, a searing pain that threatens to consume me, but I push the emotion aside. Emotion makes you weak, and right now I need to be the smartest person in the room. I step directly over his unconscious body and walk calmly into the kitchen. I open the drawer, pull out a sterile plastic food storage bag, and carefully scoop the remaining pasta from Jamal's plate into it. I seal the bag tight, preserving the chemical evidence he intended to use on me. I grab my designer purse and slide the bag safely inside. I will not let him gaslight me into thinking I am crazy. I will not let his family destroy me and steal my legacy. I am going to find out exactly what weapon he is using And then I am going to build a devastating arsenal of my own. I pull out my phone and dial a number I memorized earlier today. It rings twice before a crisp voice answers. Private Toxicology Services, this is David. David, my name is Nia. I say, my voice cold and steady. I need an expedited chemical analysis on a food sample. Top-tier confidentiality is required. I am paying out of pocket and I need the results by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning without fail. We can do that, David replies professionally. Bring the sample to the back entrance of the lab in 20 minutes. I hang up the phone. I look back at the dining room. Jamal is still snoring heavily on the floor, deeply sedated by his own malicious trap. He thought I was just a naive woman who inherited too much money and lacked the spine to defend it. He thought I was weak. He thought he could steal my father's legacy right out from under me. He is about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a black woman who knows exactly what she is worth. I grab my car keys and walk out the front door into the warm Atlanta night, leaving my treacherous husband sleeping on the floor. Let the games begin. I returned from the private toxicology laboratory just after midnight. The grand crystal chandelier was still casting its warm glow across our formal dining room. Jamal was exactly where I had left him. He was sprawled out on the expensive Persian rug, breathing heavily, completely lost in the deep chemical sleep he had maliciously prepared for me. I did not move him. I did not offer him a comfortable pillow or a warm blanket. I simply walked upstairs, washed my face, slipped into my silk pajamas, and went to sleep. For the first time in weeks, my mind felt razor sharp. The confusion and the self-doubt were completely gone. I finally knew my enemy. The next morning, golden Atlanta sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room. I sat in a velvet armchair, sipping a hot espresso, dressed immaculately, in a tailored white suit for my upcoming workday. I watched quietly as Jamal finally began to stir. He groaned loudly. His hands reached up to rub his temples. He blinked his eyes open, squinting heavily against the bright morning light. He tried to push himself up on his elbows, but swayed dangerously, clearly dizzy and severely disoriented. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I said. My voice was cheerful, dripping with the exact same patronizing tone he had used on me for months. Jamal startled, snapping his head in my direction. He looked around the room, absolute confusion washing over his handsome features. "Nia," he croaked, his voice thick and dry. "What happened? Why am I on the floor?" I set my espresso cup down on the glass coffee table and let out a soft, condescending sigh. "Are you losing your mind, honey? You fell asleep on the rug right in the middle of dinner last night. I tried to wake you up, but you were completely out of it. You were mumbling nonsense about traffic and clients. It was honestly a little bit scary." Jamal stared at me. He looked at the dining table where the empty plates still sat. His brain was working overtime, trying to process how his master plan had backfired. He had poured the powder into my bowl. He knew he did. But now he was the one waking up with a chemically induced hangover. "I fell asleep on the rug," he repeated slowly. He sounded genuinely terrified. "You did," I said, offering him a sweet, sympathetic smile. "I am really worried about you, Jamal. You have been acting so strangely lately. Maybe the stress of your brokerage firm is finally getting to you. You really need to take better care of your mental health." I did not wait for his response. I picked up my briefcase, told him to drink plenty of water, and walked straight into my home office down the hall. I shut the heavy oak doors behind me and locked them. I had a multi-million-dollar real estate empire to run, and I needed to review the latest lease agreements for my downtown properties. An hour later, the heavy oak doors rattled violently. Before I could even stand up, the lock clicked open from the outside. I knew exactly who had the spare key to my office. Tanya burst into the room without knocking. She was Jamal's younger sister, a 30-year-old woman who carried herself like she was royalty. Tanya was obsessed with projecting an image of extreme wealth. Today she was draped head to toe in flashy designer labels. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors and a pristine white suit that looked like a cheap imitation of mine. "Good morning, Tanya," I said coldly. "We usually knock in this house." Tanya ignored me entirely. She marched right up to my mahogany desk and dropped a bright orange designer handbag onto my neat stacks of paperwork. She crossed her arms, looking down at me with a sneer that perfectly mirrored her brother's arrogance. "Cut the professional act, Nia," Tanya demanded. "We both know you are falling apart. Jamal called me this morning. He is terrified. He said you were talking crazy last night and completely forgot what happened at dinner. You are losing your grip on reality. I stared at her. The audacity of this family was truly breathtaking. Jamal had immediately called his sister to spin a new narrative. Since his poisoning attempt failed, they were accelerating their psychological warfare. They were tag-teaming my sanity. Tanya reached into her designer bag. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy cardstock. She shoved the papers aggressively across my desk. They stopped right next to my keyboard. I recognized the format immediately. It was a comprehensive power of attorney document. "What is this, Tanya?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "It is your salvation," Tanya sneered, leaning over my desk. "It is a legal transfer of management. You are going to sign over the Midtown properties to Jamal. He will take over the commercial leases and handle the finances. You need to let my brother manage your assets before your brain completely rots and you ruin everything." I leaned back in my leather chair. My brain is functioning perfectly well. I am not signing over my father's legacy to anyone. Tanya laughed. It was a loud, grating sound meant to belittle me. "Are you really going to sit there and pretend you are fine? Jamal says you are losing it, and he is right. You embarrassed our entire family at the Alpha Kappa Alpha Alumni Gala last week." I narrowed my eyes. "I did no such thing." "Oh, please," Tanya snapped. "Do you not remember? You walked right up to the biggest donor of the night, a woman who has known your family for a decade, and you completely blanked on her name. You stuttered like a fool. You introduced her to the board using the wrong title. Jamal had to step in and save you from total humiliation. You are slipping, Nia. Everyone in Atlanta high society is talking about it. They say you cannot handle the pressure of your father's death and you are cracking up." I gripped the armrests of my chair. The memory of that gala flashed in my mind. I had not forgotten the donor's name. Jamal had specifically handed me the wrong introductory card right before I walked on stage. He had told me the donor had recently married and changed her last name. I trusted my husband, so I read the name he gave me. It was a deliberate sabotage. They had orchestrated that public embarrassment to build a social narrative that my mind was failing. They were creating witnesses to my supposed cognitive decline. "I am not signing that document, Tanya," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have to sign it," Tanya demanded, slamming her manicured hand on my desk. "Jamal is your husband. He is entitled to manage those properties. You are sick, Nia. You need to be institutionalized. We are trying to protect the family wealth before you do something crazy." "The family wealth," I repeated, letting out a sharp, genuine laugh. "You mean my wealth? The wealth my father built from the ground up, while your family was busy pretending to be rich on credit?" Tanya gasped, her face flushing with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that?" "I dare because I am the one paying for the very ground you stand on," I said, standing up to meet her level. "Do not come into my house and talk to me about protecting assets. Let us talk about your assets, Tanya. How is that luxury fashion boutique of yours doing?" Tanya took a sudden step back. The arrogant sneer vanished from her face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. "My boutique is doing incredibly well. It is highly exclusive. It is highly bankrupt," I corrected her, picking up a separate file folder from my drawer. "You think I do not pay attention. You think I am losing my mind. My mind is sharp enough to know that your landlord in Buckhead sent you a final eviction notice 3 days ago. You are 4 months behind on your commercial rent. You owe over $80,000 just to keep the lights on. Your credit cards are maxed out and your suppliers have cut you off." "You do not know what you are talking about," Tanya stammered. Her confident posture completely crumpled. "I know everything," I said, stepping around my desk. "You and Jamal are desperate. He wants my Midtown properties because they generate guaranteed millions in monthly revenue. You want my money to save your pathetic, failing business. But you are not getting a single dime. Take your fraudulent legal documents and get out of my office." Tanya snatched the papers off the desk. Her hands were shaking with absolute rage. She glared at me, her eyes filled with venom. "You are making a huge mistake, Nia. Jamal is not going to let this go. You are sick. If you do not sign these over willingly, Jamal will force your hand. He will get a judge to declare you incompetent, and we will take everything anyway. You are going to end up locked in a padded room." Tanya spun around and stormed out of the office. She slammed the heavy oak doors so hard the walls rattled. I stood in the silence of my office. The threat hung heavy in the air. They were not just trying to steal my money, they were trying to erase me. They wanted to lock me away in a psychiatric facility so they could feast on my father's hard work. I needed to move faster. I walked back to my desk and sat down. Suddenly, a sharp ping echoed from my laptop. My encrypted email inbox showed a new message. The sender was David from the private toxicology laboratory. The subject line read, "Urgent chemical analysis results." I clicked the email open. My eyes scanned the attached document. The clinical text was stark and undeniable. The white powder recovered from the seafood pasta was positively identified, haloperidol. The name jumped off the screen. I quickly typed the drug name into my search engine. The medical definitions confirmed my absolute worst fears. Haloperidol was a heavy, highly potent antipsychotic medication. It was typically used in psychiatric hospitals to treat severe schizophrenia. When administered to a healthy person, especially in high doses, the side effects were devastating. It caused severe memory loss. It induced intense hand tremors that mimicked Parkinson's disease. It caused extreme cognitive decline, paranoia, and slurred speech. I stared at the glowing screen as the horrible truth washed over me. Jamal was not trying to kill me. A dead wife would trigger an autopsy, a police investigation, and the immediate execution of my ironclad prenuptial agreement. He wanted something far more sinister. He was systematically drugging me with heavy antipsychotics. He was artificially creating the exact medical symptoms of severe early-onset dementia and psychotic breaks. He was trying to medically prove to the world that I was legally insane. Once a doctor certified my incompetence, Jamal would gain total, unquestioned control over my entire estate. I closed the laptop. My husband and his sister wanted to play a high-stakes game of psychological warfare. They wanted to steal my empire and lock me in a cage. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They failed to realize that they were dealing with a woman who was entirely awake, fiercely intelligent, and now completely ready to destroy them. I will absolutely burn their entire pathetic world to the ground and ensure they never see a single dime of my family money ever again. Section 3, 500 words. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a luxury reserved for women who have the time to be victims, and my schedule was entirely booked. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person in Atlanta I trusted with my father's financial secrets. Elias was a ruthless forensic accountant. He operated out of a high-security office building in Alpharetta, specializing in untangling the messy hidden finances of the city's corrupt elite. I told him I needed a completely off-the-books emergency audit of my husband. Within an hour, I was sitting across from Elias in his soundproof conference room. The thick glass walls offered a panoramic view of the skyline my father had helped build. I handed Elias a secure flash drive containing every shred of financial data I could legally extract from my home office network. Elias was a man of very few words. He plugged the drive into his encrypted terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard with clinical precision. For 2 agonizing hours, the only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of the wall clock and the rapid clicking of his keys. I paced the length of the room, staring down at the busy streets below, calculating my next move. Finally, Elias leaned back in his black leather chair. His face was an unreadable mask, but his dark eyes conveyed a deep, disturbing urgency. He turned his massive monitor toward me. The spreadsheets glowing on the screen were a masterpiece of absolute financial betrayal. Jamal had not just been skimming off the top of our joint accounts to fund a lavish lifestyle. He had been orchestrating a massive, highly illegal leverage scheme right under my nose. Elias pointed to a series of complex offshore wire transfers. Jamal had forged my signature on multiple high-tier commercial loan applications. He had used 3 of my most valuable midtown retail properties as collateral to secure a $2 million shadow loan. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Why would a highly successful investment broker need $2 million in shadow money? Elias clicked to the next secure file, answering my unspoken question immediately. Jamal was severely addicted to underground sports betting. He owed massive debts to a highly dangerous, unregulated gambling syndicate operating out of Miami. They were aggressively demanding their money, and Jamal was using my father's legacy to save his own life. But the ultimate betrayal did not stop there. Elias pulled up the hidden ledger for Tanya's failing fashion boutique. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been systematically siphoned from my corporate accounts, cleverly disguised as vendor payments and consulting fees. Jamal was heavily funding his sister's ridiculous delusion of being an Atlanta high society fashion mogul. Tanya was parading around Buckhead in designer clothes bought entirely with my stolen money. They were bleeding me dry. If Jamal successfully executed his malicious plan to have me declared legally insane, he would gain absolute control over the entire estate. He would rapidly liquidate everything to cover his tracks and pay off his dangerous associates, leaving me locked in a psychiatric ward with absolutely nothing to my name. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. The sheer audacity of their plan was suffocating. I needed to block his access immediately, but simply freezing the joint accounts would tip him off before I could gather enough concrete evidence to send them both to federal prison. I needed a permanent, indestructible financial fortress. I looked across the table at Elias. I instructed him to draft an irrevocable blind trust immediately. I wanted every single commercial property, every liquid asset, and every stock portfolio transferred into it. Once signed, the trust would act as an impenetrable vault. Neither Jamal nor I could authorize a single sale or transfer without the explicit approval of a strict, independent fiduciary board. Even if a corrupt judge declared me completely incompetent, the trust would legally block Jamal from ever touching a single dime of the principal. Elias nodded slowly, his fingers already moving to draft the complex preliminary documents. But he stopped suddenly and looked at me with grave concern. He warned me that establishing a corporate trust of this magnitude required meticulous legal filings. The state of Georgia required a mandatory 48-hour processing window for the asset transfer to become legally binding and fully active. I had to survive 2 full days in a house with a man who was actively poisoning my food. I had to play the part of the fading, mentally unstable wife while fiercely guarding my life against a desperate, cornered predator. I told Elias to start the paperwork immediately. I would handle my treacherous husband. I walked out of the Alpharetta office building with a heart made of solid ice. The afternoon sun beat down on the pavement, but I felt entirely cold. As I unlocked my car door, my phone began to vibrate heavily in my hand. The caller ID flashed Jamal's name. I let it ring 3 times, deliberately controlling my breathing, forcing my voice to sound incredibly weak and confused, before answering. Jamal spoke immediately, his tone dripping with thick, suffocating fake concern. He told me he was so incredibly worried about my little outburst with Tanya earlier today. He said my memory lapses were becoming extremely dangerous, and that he could not bear to see his beautiful wife suffer like this any longer. He informed me he had taken the liberty of booking a highly exclusive private concierge doctor to visit our house tonight for a thorough wellness check. Hun urged me to come straight home so we could finally get to the bottom of my rapid cognitive decline. The pieces of his sinister trap were falling perfectly into place. He was bringing a corrupt medical professional directly into my personal sanctuary. He was rapidly building the false medical paper trail required to execute an involuntary psychiatric hold. In the state of Georgia, a specific form allows a licensed doctor to authorize an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric commitment if they deem a patient a severe danger to themselves or severely cognitively impaired. Jamal wanted me strapped to a gurney and hauled away in the dead of night, effectively removing me from my own empire. I kept my voice small and trembling, playing right into his hands. I thanked him profusely for being such a wonderful, caring husband during this difficult time. I promised I was driving straight back to our Buckhead estate. I hung up the phone and gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. The drive back to my mansion felt like a tense descent into a brutal war zone. I navigated through the heavy Atlanta traffic, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I pulled through the massive wrought iron security gates and parked in the circular driveway. The house was entirely silent, casting long, menacing shadows in the fading evening light. The grand architecture of my home suddenly felt like a beautifully designed cage. I unlocked the heavy double front doors and stepped cautiously into the grand foyer. The crystal chandelier overhead was turned off. The lights were dimmed incredibly low, creating an atmosphere of intense unease. I walked slowly toward the formal living room, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Sitting perfectly upright on my custom velvet sofa was a strange man in a tightly tailored suit. I was holding a vintage leather medical bag firmly on his lap. He smiled at me, a cold, remarkably empty expression that made the blood run absolutely cold in my veins. Standing directly behind the sofa, casting a tall shadow over the room, was Jamal. My devoted, loving husband was staring at me with dead, highly calculating eyes. He wore a crisp dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, projecting a casual demeanor that deeply contrasted with the sinister reality of the situation. And in his right hand, resting casually against the back of the velvet sofa, he was holding a large medical-grade syringe. The sharp steel needle gleamed menacingly in the dim light of the living room. He tilted his head slightly, a sickening smirk playing on his lips. He was completely ready to inject me with a heavy sedative, ready to drag me out of my own life, and ready to steal everything my father had built. My pulse hammered wildly in my chest, a frantic beat of survival and pure adrenaline. The trap was sprung. The predator was in my home, armed and waiting. But I refused to be his prey. I stood tall, locking eyes with the man who sought to destroy me, calculating my exact next move. The 48-hour countdown had officially begun, and I was going to win. I took a slow, deliberate breath, keeping my expression perfectly blank. It was time to play the most dangerous game of my entire existence. I stepped fully into the living room. Jamal smoothly slid his right hand behind his back. He slipped the heavy steel syringe into his tailored trousers. His fake smile snapped back onto his face. He placed a guiding hand on my back. He led me to the sofa. Sitting across from us was a strange man holding a medical bag. He smelled like cheap cologne, completely out of place in our Buckhead mansion. Jamal introduced him as Dr. Sterling, a highly exclusive concierge psychiatrist he had hired just for me. Dr. Sterling leaned forward. He spoke to me in a slow, patronizing tone. He asked me how I was feeling, noting my husband was deeply concerned about my memory lapses. I did not blink. I sank into the plush cushions and let my shoulders drop, playing the part of a fragile woman. I told the doctor I was tired. Dr. Sterling opened a thick leather notebook. He said he needed to gauge my cognitive baseline. He asked my name and the date. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. It was an insulting psychological evaluation designed to document cognitive decline. Jamal stood right beside the sofa. I could feel his eyes burning into my face. He was waiting for me to stumble, waiting for the heavy dose of haloperidol to finally take effect. But my mind was incredibly sharp. I answered every question with flawless precision. I kept my voice soft and slightly trembling, making sure to maintain the illusion of vulnerability while delivering perfect responses. Dr. Sterling frowned slightly. He jotted down notes, annoyed I was not displaying the confusion Jamal promised. I decided to change the rhythm. I looked directly into Dr. Sterling's eyes and offered a polite, apologetic smile. I told him my mind was completely fine, but the complexities of my father's corporate portfolio were naturally overwhelming. I shifted the conversation directly into highly advanced financial analytics. I detailed exact amortization schedules for 3 commercial properties. I rattled off precise square footage and the fluctuating interest rates of our mezzanine debt structures. I cited exact dates and legal clauses of tenant lease renewals. I calculated the projected quarterly yields down to the exact decimal point, factoring in the aggressive capital expenditure deductions we had recently authorized for the new high-rise developments, all without ever breaking eye contact for a single fleeting second. The heavy silence in the living room was deafening. Dr. Sterling stopped writing entirely. His pen hovered motionless. He stared at me with incredibly wide, panicked eyes, completely and utterly out of his depth in a conversation he had absolutely no business participating in. He was a disgraced medical professional, but he was currently being lectured by a financial powerhouse. Jamal shifted uncomfortably. The veins in his neck were pulsing with rage. His narrative was falling apart in front of his hired gun. He tried to interrupt me, claiming I was rambling. I ignored him entirely and continued my flawless breakdown. I needed to solidify the fact that I possessed absolute mental clarity. Dr. Sterling wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He looked up at Jamal with panic. This was not the victim Jamal had paid him to evaluate. I knew the tension in the room had reached its absolute peak and I needed to create a massive distraction. My eyes darted to the glass of ice water resting on the coffee table. I prepared my tactical move. I reached forward, pretending to grab the glass. I purposely misjudged the distance. My fingers slammed against the rim. The tall glass tipped over instantly. Freezing water cascaded across the coffee table, splashing directly onto Dr. Sterling's trousers. The fake psychiatrist jumped up, brushing water off his lap. Jamal cursed, rushing to the kitchen for a towel. Absolute chaos erupted in the dimly lit living room. In that perfect distraction, I made my move. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a tiny audio recording device. I leaned forward under the guise of wiping up the spilled water. I reached underneath the solid metal frame of the table. I pressed the strong adhesive back of the micro recorder firmly against the underside of the table. The device locked into place, completely invisible. I pulled my hand back and began dabbing at the spilled water. Jamal sprinted back, clutching white towels. He threw them onto the table, glaring at me with raw fury. He apologized profusely to the wet doctor. I shrank back into the cushions, crying soft, fake tears. I wailed about how clumsy I was becoming, leaning back into the role of the broken wife. Dr. Sterling hastily packed his bag. He wanted out of this house immediately. He told Jamal they would need to conclude the medical evaluation at a later time. Jamal escorted the doctor out, leaving me alone with my planted trap. The front door slammed shut. The echo vibrated through the mansion. I heard Jamal's heavy footsteps stomping back. The fake charm was entirely gone. He stormed into the room, grabbed me by my upper arm, and yanked me up from the velvet sofa. His harsh grip was severely bruising my skin, his dark, calculating eyes blazing with a dangerous, deeply unhinged aggression that I had never seen him display before. He shoved his face inches from mine. He told me I was deeply, undeniably sick and that I needed serious, long-term professional help. He told me my mind was decaying and that my little financial speech was nothing but a pathetic, manic episode. He demanded that I surrender my corporate duties immediately. He screamed that I was going to ruin my father's legacy if I did not sign the power of attorney over to him tonight. The terrifying threat of imminent physical violence radiated violently from his entire rigid body. I could feel the cold steel of the hidden syringe pressing against my hip through his trouser pocket. I needed to de-escalate the situation and buy myself the 48 hours required for the irrevocable blind trust to activate. I utilized verbal judo, letting tears stream down my face. I softened my posture completely, making myself look small and entirely defeated. I placed my trembling hands flat against his chest. I looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes. I apologized frantically for spilling the water and embarrassing him in front of the doctor. I told him he was right about everything. I admitted that I was losing my mind, that the stress was too much, and that I desperately needed his strong guidance to save my business. Jamal's aggressive grip on my arm loosened slightly as my submissive words stroked his massive, fragile ego. He loved hearing me beg. He loved feeling superior. I leaned in closer, my voice barely above a desperate whisper. I promised him I would surrender total control. I told him I would sign the power of attorney and the Midtown property deeds over to him, but I wanted to do it officially and proudly. I promised to sign whatever he needed this Saturday, right in front of all our elite friends and board members, at our upcoming 5th anniversary gala. The prospect of a public surrender was too tempting for his narcissism to resist. Jamal wanted Atlanta high society to watch me willingly hand my crown over to him. It would legitimize his theft perfectly. A slow, greedy smile spread across his handsome face. He released my arm and smoothed down my hair with chilling, fake affection. He kissed my forehead, turned the lights off, and then confidently walked upstairs. Late that night, long after the mansion had fallen completely silent, and Jamal was deep asleep, I crept back downstairs into the pitch-black living room. I moved soundlessly across the marble floor. I reached underneath the heavy metal frame of the glass coffee table and peeled the hidden micro-recorder free from its adhesive backing. I clutched the tiny device in my palm and hurried straight back into my locked home office. I plugged the recorder directly into my encrypted laptop and pressed play. The audio files loaded onto the screen. I skipped quickly past the loud, chaotic sounds of the intentionally spilled water and my pathetic fake crying echoing in the background. I found the file recorded right after Jamal escorted the wet, angry doctor into the grand foyer. I turned the volume up. The audio was crystal clear. I successfully captured the exact, undeniable audio recording of my treacherous husband, physically handing Dr. Sterling a massive, heavy envelope of cash, explicitly and boldly bribing the disgraced physician to officially sign a totally false, legally binding certificate of severe medical incompetence directly against me. The trap was perfectly set. I smiled at the glowing laptop screen. They were marching blindly and confidently toward their absolute inescapable financial and legal ruin. The next morning arrives with a heavy thunderstorm rolling across the Atlanta skyline. The dark, turbulent clouds perfectly match my deeply calculating mood. The grueling 48-hour waiting period is finally over. I drive straight through the pouring rain to Elias's high-security office building located in Alpharetta. I walk confidently into his soundproof conference room and take a seat at the sleek glass table. Elias slides a massive, intimidating stack of thick legal documents directly toward me. The irrevocable blind trust is fully prepared and completely ironclad. I pick up a heavy gold pen from the table. I do not hesitate for a single fleeting fraction of a second. I sign my name firmly on every single dotted line. I press my thumb to the ink pad, stamping my fingerprint onto the final page to authenticate the massive transfer. With those swift, deliberate strokes of dark ink, my entire $30 million commercial real estate is instantly locked away. It is now secured deep within an impenetrable financial fortress. The trust is officially a living, breathing, unyielding legal entity. Jamal cannot touch a single dime of my hard-earned money. Tanya cannot siphon another stolen penny for her failing luxury boutique. Even if Jamal successfully bribes every corrupt doctor in the state of Georgia to declare me legally insane or completely brain-dead, he has absolutely zero access to my principal assets. My late father's legacy is entirely secure from their greedy hands. I thank Elias, hand him his exorbitant retainer fee in crisp cash, and walk back out into the pouring rain. I feel absolutely invincible. The invisible, suffocating chains my treacherous husband tried to wrap around my neck are completely shattered. Now, I just need to sit back and watch the glorious, devastating fallout. By noon, the inevitable financial shockwave finally hits. I am sitting safely in my downtown executive office, actively monitoring my personal banking dashboard on my encrypted laptop. Jamal is currently across town at the highly exclusive Capital City Club in Buckhead. He is hosting a lavish, high-stakes lunch with a prominent private lender. He is desperately trying to secure a massive bridge loan to hold off the dangerous Miami gambling syndicate until he can successfully steal my valuable midtown properties. I watch the real-time transaction log pop up on my bright screen. A charge for $480 from the prestigious country club dining room suddenly appears. It is immediately flagged by the system and firmly denied. Jamal's Platinum corporate card is directly linked to my primary business accounts. I permanently severed that specific financial connection exactly 3 hours ago. A second desperate charge attempt quickly appears on the screen. Denied. A third panicked swipe is processed. Denied. I can picture the exact look of utter humiliation washing over his handsome, incredibly arrogant face. I can vividly imagine him standing there in his expensive tailored suit, sweating profusely in front of a powerful investor, while the polite country club manager explains that his card has been completely declined. His entire fake persona of unlimited wealth is crumbling in public. My cell phone begins to light up brilliantly on my desk. Jamal is calling me frantically. I let it ring. He calls again. I ignore it, smiling softly. I watch my screen as two more charges are desperately attempted at a nearby luxury car dealership where he leases his sleek sports car. Both are instantly declined. The financial starvation is absolute and entirely unrelenting. Less than an hour later, the heavy glass doors of my executive office fly open violently. Jamal storms into the quiet room. He does not bother knocking. The charming, doting husband mask is completely gone, replaced by pure malice. His dark eyes are wild with frantic panic and raw, unfiltered fury. His expensive silk tie is loosened, and he is breathing heavily, exactly like a man running for his life. He slams his hands down hard on my mahogany desk, leaning over me with an aggressive, highly threatening posture. He demands to know exactly what is happening with the frozen bank accounts. He screams that he was horribly humiliated at the country club in front of a crucial client. He yells that his corporate cards are completely frozen, and he cannot access the vital operational funds he desperately needs for his brokerage firm. I look up at him calmly. The sheer suffocating terror radiating from his tense body is incredibly intoxicating. He knows the ruthless Miami syndicate is closing in fast, and his stolen financial lifeline is suddenly gone. He grabs my computer monitor, tilting it aggressively toward himself. High demands I log into the banking portal and fix the terrible error immediately. He tells me I am deliberately sabotaging his career and that my worsening mental sickness is completely destroying our shared livelihood. He raises his voice, shouting that he absolutely needs $200,000 transferred into his personal checking account by the end of the day, or we are going to lose everything we own. I do not flinch, but I intentionally force my body to tremble violently. I widen my eyes, filling them with fake absolute panic. I play directly into the false dementia narrative he has been so desperately trying to build against me. I push my leather chair back, abruptly pressing my shaking hands to the sides of my head. I tell him I do not know what is happening. I cry out that I think the bank must have made a terrible, massive mistake. I tell him my memory is so incredibly foggy today and everything feels deeply confusing to me. I start hyperventilating, perfectly faking a severe panic attack right in front of his angry face. I sob loudly, claiming I must have accidentally clicked the wrong button on the security portal because my hands have been shaking so badly lately. Jamal glares at me. Deep disgust and mounting desperation wore openly on his handsome face. I reach out and grab his tailored sleeve, looking up at him like a completely helpless, broken woman. I promise him we will fix everything very soon. I tell him I will call the bank executives and have all the frozen accounts fully restored at our highly anticipated 5th anniversary gala on Saturday. I promise I will stand up proudly in front of all the legacy board members and officially sign everything over to him so I never make a stupid financial mistake ever again. The mention of the grand public gala works perfectly. It pacifies his immediate violent rage. He rips his arm away from my desperate grasp, curses loudly under his breath, and storms out of my office to do frantic damage control. I instantly drop the panic-stricken act. I sit up perfectly straight, smooth my white suit, and pull out my personal cell phone. I open a hidden, highly encrypted security application. While Jamal was busy screaming at me in my downtown office, his greedy sister Tanya was making a bold, arrogant move of her very own. My live security feed shows the interior of our Buckhead mansion. I am supposedly still at the bank trying to fix the frozen accounts. Tanya has secretly sneaked into my home using the spare key Jamal foolishly gave her. She is currently kneeling deep inside my massive master bedroom closet. She is aggressively hacking into my heavy steel floor safe, using an expensive digital override tool Jamal undoubtedly purchased for her. I watch the live high-definition video feed with a cold, brilliantly triumphant smile. Tanya finally pops the heavy steel safe door open. She frantically digs her manicured hands through the velvet-lined shelves. She bypasses my expensive diamond jewelry and aggressively grabs a thick manila envelope. She clutches the heavy envelope tightly to her chest with a look of pure, wicked greed. She thinks she has just successfully stolen the master deeds to my entire commercial real estate empire. She thinks she is holding the ultimate key to saving her bankrupt fashion boutique and permanently securing her luxury lifestyle forever. She quickly stuffs the heavy envelope into her bright orange designer handbag and practically sprints out of my master bedroom. I watch her leave my house via the hidden exterior cameras. She has absolutely no idea she just walked straight into my devastating, inescapable trap. The fake documents she just stole are beautifully crafted forgeries I commissioned Elias to print. They contain subtly altered financial numbers and fake corporate signatures that will definitively link her and Jamal directly to a massive, easily provable federal wire fraud conspiracy. By stealing those specific papers, she has willingly gathered the exact rope I need to hang them both in federal court. They think they are playing a brilliant game of chess against a weak, failing opponent. They do not realize I am the one controlling the entire board. Saturday will be the greatest performance of my life. I closed the application. Jamal returned to our Buckhead mansion later that evening. I remained safely locked inside my home office monitoring the security cameras. I watched as he stomped into the grand foyer, his face still twisted in a knot of desperate rage from his humiliating day of declined credit cards. Tanya was already waiting for him in the formal living room. She was practically vibrating with nervous, greedy excitement. As Jamal walked in, she proudly slapped the thick manila envelope onto the edge of the glass coffee table. She bragged loudly about easily hacking into my heavy floor safe, boasting that she had secured our financial salvation. Jamal ripped the envelope open. I zoomed in on his face using the camera feed. His dark eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated triumph as he quickly reviewed the contents. He pulled out the documents he believed were the master deeds to my entire commercial real estate empire, alongside my private corporate ledgers. He laughed out loud, pulling his sister into a tight hug. They possess the ultimate keys to my kingdom. What these two arrogant fools did not realize was that the ledgers they held were completely fabricated. I had meticulously designed those specific documents alongside Elias. The fake ledgers prominently listed the exact banking routing numbers and offshore account details that directly tied the stolen $800,000 straight to their personal names. By actively possessing these documents and explicitly planning to use them to secure fraudulent loans, Jamal and Tanya were firmly establishing undeniable intent for massive federal wire fraud. I watched them celebrate their victory drinking my expensive champagne. They were blindly tightening the legal noose around their own necks. They thought they had finally defeated me. This was a monumental error. They were extremely foolish. Indeed, emboldened by his new supposed leverage, Jamal decided to aggressively accelerate my engineered mental decline. He needed me completely incapacitated before the grand anniversary gala on Saturday night, so he could seamlessly assume total control of the estate. The very next morning, I stood quietly in the pantry area of our massive gourmet kitchen. I watched closely through the clear reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator doors as Jamal prepared my morning coffee. His hands moved quickly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the familiar glass vial, and dumped a heavy, double dose of haloperidol directly into the steaming black liquid. He stirred it rapidly, masking the deadly white powder. He brought the ceramic mug over to me, flashing his signature predatory smile. I took the warm mug from his hands, thanking him profusely for always taking such wonderful care of me. I brought the rim to my lips, tilting it back, and expertly pretending to take a long, satisfying sip. The exact moment he turned his back to check a notification on his cell phone, I moved swiftly. I silently poured the toxic, drugged coffee directly into the dark soil of a large potted plant sitting by the kitchen window. I quickly wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and set the empty mug down onto the granite counter. I praised his excellent brewing skills with a bright, vacant smile. Jamal looked incredibly pleased with himself. He took my empty mug and placed it in the sink, thoroughly convinced he was successfully poisoning my mind into utter submission. He smiled widely at me. I returned his warm smile, knowing he was actively digging his own deep grave. The final confrontation was approaching very rapidly. He would lose absolutely everything very soon. I was entirely ready now. Now I had to commit fully and absolutely to the devastating illusion. Over the next 48 hours, I carefully transformed myself into a broken, rapidly deteriorating shell of a woman. I began faking the severe physical and mental symptoms of heavy antipsychotic poisoning with award-winning precision. During breakfast the next day, I forced my hands to tremble violently, intentionally dropping a heavy silver spoon, clattering onto the marble floor. I stared at the fallen spoon with wide, empty eyes, acting completely helpless. I started slurring my words slightly during casual conversations, letting my sentences trail off into confused, disjointed silence. I began acting deeply paranoid and erratic in front of our household staff. I cornered my loyal housekeeper in the hallway, frantically asking her if she was secretly moving my things, loudly accusing her of hiding my important corporate files. The poor staff members looked at me with genuine pity and deep, unsettling concern. They whispered among themselves, clearly believing the tragic narrative that the immense pressure of my father's death had finally broken my sanity. I made absolutely sure that Jamal and Tanya witnessed every single moment of my fabricated mental decay. I would randomly stop walking in the middle of the room, staring blankly at the walls. I would call Jamal by my late father's name, crying softly when he corrected me. My performance was flawless, meticulous, and incredibly convincing. I buried my fierce, burning rage beneath a perfect mask of cognitive collapse. They watched me stumble through the house, whispering cruel jokes to each other when they thought I could not hear them. I absorbed every single insult, silently storing their malice away. I knew my retribution would be utterly catastrophic. My patience was my most lethal weapon. I was ready to completely ruin them. Jamal and Tanya reveled in my supposed destruction. They mocked me openly right inside the walls of my own home, truly believing that my brain was too deeply damaged to understand their cruel insults. Tanya lounged lazily on my custom velvet sofa all afternoon, drinking my most expensive wine, laughing loudly whenever I pretended to forget what day of the week it was. She became impossibly brazenly greedy. On Friday afternoon, the day before the gala, she walked slowly down the grand sweeping staircase, wearing my custom diamond tennis necklace. The pristine stones glittered brightly under the chandelier. That specific necklace had cost over $80,000, a precious gift from my father upon my college graduation. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, forcing my hands to shake as I looked up at her. I weakly asked her why she was wearing my jewelry. Tanya rolled her eyes dramatically and laughed a harsh, grating laugh. She looked right at Jamal, who was standing nearby in the foyer, and sneered at me. She told me that I had gladly given it to her yesterday as a generous gift, claiming my sick brain was just too rotten and useless to remember my own generosity. Jamal smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. He nodded slowly, agreeing completely with his greedy sister. He told me to go rest my fragile mind before the big party tomorrow night. They thought they had entirely won. They looked at me and saw a defeated, broken woman ripe for the plucking. They had absolutely no idea they were staring directly into the eyes of a highly calculated predator, patiently waiting to strike. Their arrogant confidence was blinding them entirely. They were entirely defenseless against my upcoming devastating attack. I was ready for absolute war, always. Late Friday night, the eve of our highly anticipated 5th anniversary gala, the mansion was completely silent. Jamal was sleeping deeply in the master bedroom, dreaming of the vast fortune he thought he was about to inherit. I was locked safely inside the dark walls of my secure home office. I reached under my heavy mahogany desk and pulled a cheap, untraceable burner phone from the bottom drawer. I had purchased it specifically for this exact moment. At exactly midnight, the small device vibrated silently in the palm of my hand. I answered the secure call. Elias spoke immediately, his voice a low, sharp tone that commanded absolute attention. He told me the trap was perfectly set and ready to spring. He confirmed the Federal Financial Crimes Unit had fully reviewed the fabricated ledgers, the hidden offshore transfer records, and the undeniable proof of the forged loan applications. They had verified the massive wire fraud conspiracy beyond a single shadow of a doubt. The federal agents and local Atlanta detectives were fully briefed, mobilized, and ready to execute the sting operation. Elias told me they would be attending the anniversary gala tomorrow night, seamlessly blending into the crowd, disguised as high-end catering staff and wealthy private investors. They had secured all the necessary warrants to arrest Jamal and Tanya on site. I thanked Elias for his impeccable work and ended the call. I sat in the darkness of my office, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. The board was set. The pieces were perfectly aligned. Tomorrow night, the elite society of Atlanta would gather to witness a spectacular show. I slipped the burner phone back into the drawer. The countdown to their absolute destruction was in its final hours. I closed my eyes and finally rested peacefully. The morning sun breached the heavy silk curtains of my master bedroom, signaling the arrival of Saturday. Today was our 5th anniversary. Today was the day my empire would be violently cleansed of its parasites. I rose from my bed and walked to the massive windows overlooking the sprawling grounds of our Buckhead estate. The transformation was already in full swing. Dozens of luxury event staff swarmed the pristine manicured lawns. Massive white event tents were being erected near the Olympic-sized swimming pool. High-end florists were rapidly unloading hundreds of imported white orchids, draping them over the grand marble staircase and across the heavy iron gates. The absolute elite of Atlanta society would begin arriving in just a few hours. Mayors, legacy real estate moguls, influential politicians, and the wealthiest socialites in the city were all on the exclusive guest list. Jamal had spared absolutely no expense for this particular gathering. He wanted the largest, most influential audience possible to witness my tragic downfall. He wanted my business associates to watch me crumble. I watched the chaotic preparations from my window, keeping my posture slightly hunched and my expression perfectly blank whenever a staff member happened to glance up at the second-floor balcony. I had a grueling, masterful performance to deliver today, and I needed to stay deep inside my character. Every single movement I made had to project absolute fragility and profound mental decay. By late afternoon, the mansion was buzzing with frantic energy. The sound of clinking crystal and tuning musical instruments echoed through the grand hallways. I retreated into my lavish dressing room to begin preparing for the evening. I sat in front of the brightly lit vanity mirror, staring intently at my own reflection. I wore a stunning floor-length emerald green silk gown that hugged my curves perfectly. My makeup was intentionally understated, making me look slightly pale and incredibly exhausted. I deliberately left my neck entirely bare. I knew Tanya was actively wearing my $80,000 diamond tennis necklace downstairs, parading it around the caterers like she owned the entire estate. As I picked up my lipstick, the heavy wooden dressing room door swung open. Tanya stepped inside, uninvited as always. She wore a gaudy, overly sequined silver dress that desperately screamed for attention. My beautiful diamond necklace sparkled brightly against her chest, a glaring symbol of her massive theft. She closed the door behind her and locked it, leaning against the frame with a deeply malicious smirk. She walked slowly toward me, her dark eyes sweeping over my emerald gown with pure, unadulterated disgust. She placed her hands firmly on my shoulders, leaning down until her face was hovering just inches from my ear. The heavy scent of her cheap perfume made my stomach churn violently. She looked at my reflection in the mirror, her expression completely hollow and exceedingly cruel. Tanya began her final vicious psychological assault. She kept her voice at a low, menacing whisper, treating me like a wounded animal trapped in a snare. She told me I looked absolutely terrible tonight. She said it was incredibly tragic to see how far the great Nia had fallen since her father died. She leaned in closer, her painted nails digging sharply into my bare shoulders. She started gaslighting me aggressively about my late father's deepest wishes. She told me my father always knew I was far too weak to handle his massive commercial real estate empire. She whispered that my father secretly wanted a strong, capable man like Jamal to take over the legacy, and that leaving the properties to me was nothing but a terrible, regretful mistake. She said everyone in Atlanta high society knew I was a complete fraud and a massive disappointment to my family name. Tanya tightened her painful grip on my shoulders. She looked directly into my eyes through the vanity mirror and delivered her final toxic command. "You are entirely broken, Nia," she whispered smoothly. "Your mind is gone. Your empire is crumbling. Stop fighting it." Just sign the corporate papers tonight and let us rule. I stared back at her reflection. I suppressed the violent burning rage that threatened to explode from my chest. I wanted to grab her by her sequined collar and throw her completely out of my house. I wanted to rip my stolen diamonds off her treacherous neck and reclaim what was rightfully mine. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs and physically drag her out into the street. But I did not scream. I did not slap her smug, arrogant face. Instead, I forced my bottom lip to quiver pathetically. I blinked my eyes rapidly, perfectly summoning a single heavy tear. I let the tear fall slowly down my pale cheek, ruining my carefully applied makeup. I lowered my head, staring at the floor in absolute crushing defeat. I let out a soft, broken sob, making Tanya truly believe she had completely and utterly shattered my remaining spirit. Tanya laughed, a dark, victorious sound that echoed loudly in the quiet dressing room. She patted my cheek condescendingly, deliberately treating me like a pathetic, helpless child who had entirely lost her way. She unlocked the door and walked out, absolutely certain she had won the psychological war forever. The exact second the door clicked shut, my tears stopped instantly. My posture snapped perfectly straight. I quickly wiped the ruined makeup from my cheek and reapplied it flawlessly. The time for crying was entirely over. I grabbed a dark velvet shawl, wrapped it tightly around my shoulders, and slipped out of the dressing room. I completely avoided the grand staircase, taking the hidden servant corridors down to the back of the massive estate. The caterers were busy setting up the outdoor dining stations, so the rear garden paths were entirely empty. I moved silently through the manicured hedges until I reached a large, unmarked black catering van parked near the service entrance. The heavy metal side door slid open immediately as I approached. I stepped quickly into the dim interior of the van. Standing inside were 4 men in crisp catering uniforms and 2 women dressed in high-end designer gowns. They were not event staff or wealthy investors. They were my elite private security team and undercover federal agents from the Financial Crimes Unit. Elias stood at the front of the van, monitoring a bank of glowing laptop screens, displaying the mansion's interior and exterior security feeds. He gave me a sharp, confirming nod. The agents gathered around me in a tight, focused circle. I outlined the final, precise details of our massive sting operation. I identified exactly which guests in the ballroom were my undercover agents. We went over the floor plan, ensuring every single exit was heavily monitored and completely blocked. We finalized the exact verbal signal I would use to initiate the massive takedown. I looked around the tight space, feeling the immense, unwavering support of a professional team that was fully prepared to dismantle my enemies. I thanked them for their absolute discretion and stepped back out into the cool evening air. I was ready to deliver a phenomenal, devastating execution of justice. My mind was entirely focused on the ultimate mission at hand. I walked briskly back toward the mansion, ready to take my proper place. At the spectacular gala, the evening air felt charged with an electric, undeniable anticipation. As I rounded the corner near the grand stone patio, I stopped abruptly. Jamal was standing completely hidden behind a large marble pillar. He was speaking frantically into his cell phone, his voice hushed but highly aggressive. I pressed my back flat against the cold stone wall, holding my breath, as I listened to my husband finalize his ultimate betrayal. He was actively confirming a reservation with a private, highly corrupt psychiatric transport team. He aggressively ordered them to arrive at the front gates of the Buckhead mansion at exactly 10 o'clock tonight. He explicitly instructed them to bypass the security checkpoint and drive their heavy van directly up to the main ballroom doors. He demanded they bring heavy physical restraints and incredibly strong chemical sedatives. He wanted them to brutally pull me away in a medical straitjacket right in front of the mayor, the prestigious Legacy board members, and the entire elite society of Atlanta. He wanted my absolute, inescapable public humiliation to instantly solidify his total theft of my corporate empire. He wanted to cement his completely fabricated narrative of my severe mental collapse. I smiled coldly in the dark, concealing shadows. The grand stage was set perfectly. My treacherous husband had absolutely no idea what was rapidly coming for him tonight. I turned around and walked silently toward the towering main ballroom doors, fully prepared to destroy his entire pathetic existence. The trap was sprung. The countdown was over. It was finally time for the grand finale. Section 8 exactly fun 500 words. The towering main ballroom doors swung open as I stepped into the blinding brilliance of my own 5th anniversary gala. A string quartet played soft classical melodies. The absolute elite of Atlanta society had arrived in full force. I recognized several billionaire real estate moguls who had done lucrative business with my late father. Powerful politicians, wealthy socialites, and corporate board members filled the massive room. They were dressed in their finest formal wear, radiating immense wealth and absolute privilege. Right in the center stood my treacherous husband. Jamal looked incredibly handsome in his custom-tailored black tuxedo. He was actively working the room like a seasoned, desperate politician. I stood near the grand entrance, observing him carefully from the shadows. He was quietly spreading his toxic narrative, telling the most powerful people in Atlanta about my supposed tragic early onset dementia. He was actively destroying my professional reputation, planting the final seeds of doubt before his grand public takeover. The wealthy investors nodded sympathetically, completely buying his malicious lies. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to tremble slightly. I let my shoulders slump heavily, adopting the fragile, broken posture I had perfected over the last 48 hours. I walked slowly into the glittering center of the massive ballroom. The exact moment the guests noticed me, a heavy, uncomfortable hush fell over the immediate crowd. I maintained my vacant, bewildered expression, stumbling slightly on my expensive emerald heels to sell the devastating illusion. Jamal spotted me immediately. He rushed over, wrapping a strong, highly protective arm around my waist. He guided me toward a large, circular table near the center of the room, loudly instructing the waitstaff to bring me a glass of warm water instead of champagne. I leaned heavily against him, acting completely exhausted and deeply confused by the bright lights and the loud music. Tanya materialized from the wealthy crowd, wearing her overly sequined silver dress and my stolen diamond tennis necklace. Tanya approached a group of influential female board members who had known me since childhood. She loudly asked me if I remembered their names. I stared blankly at the woman, forcing my eyes to look entirely vacant. I stuttered heavily, intentionally getting her name wrong. The women exchanged heartbreaking glances of pure pity. Tanya smirked viciously, loudly telling the women my brain was just not working right tonight. A few minutes later, Jamal guided me to the front of the room. We had previously agreed to give a short joint welcome speech. He handed me a set of crisp white index cards. I looked down at them and realized instantly what he had done. He had completely switched my speech cards. He wanted me to read them out loud and sound completely insane. I gripped the cards with shaking hands. I stepped up to the silver microphone. I looked out at the sea of wealthy faces. I read the switched cards verbatim, intentionally stumbling over the confusing words. I paused for long, highly awkward periods, acting completely lost and terribly confused. The thick silence in the grand ballroom was utterly humiliating. Jamal stepped up quickly, taking the microphone from my trembling hands with a highly dramatic sigh. He wrapped his arm around me again, apologizing profusely to the crowd for my disjointed performance. He told them the stress of the evening was simply too much for my failing mind to handle. I lowered my head, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. Every single person in that ballroom was now entirely convinced that my brilliant mind was completely gone. Jamal and Tanya exchanged a quick, victorious glance. They thought their psychological torture was working perfectly. They had absolutely no idea they were simply setting the grand stage for my ultimate devastating retribution. The lavish evening progressed exactly according to their malicious plan. I knew the undercover federal agents from the Financial Crimes Unit were seamlessly blending into the wealthy background. I spotted two undercover agents dressed perfectly as high-end catering staff, pouring expensive wine and observing the room with sharp, highly trained eyes. I saw another federal agent dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, mingling effortlessly with the wealthy real estate investors near the bar. My elite private security team was positioned discreetly near every single exit, locking the massive mansion down completely. The trap was ready to snap shut violently. At exactly 9:45, Jamal stood up confidently from his chair. The bright, ringing sound echoed loudly across the massive ballroom. The classical music stopped instantly. The low chatter of the wealthy guests faded into absolute heavy silence. Every single eye in the room turned to look at my handsome, treacherous husband. Jamal walked slowly toward the exact center of the room, standing directly under the massive, sparkling crystal chandelier. He looked incredibly powerful, commanding the complete attention of Atlanta high society. He raised his glass slowly, adopting a deeply fake, incredibly sorrowful tone. He took a deep, shaky breath, executing his theatrical performance with absolute precision. Friends, family, and esteemed colleagues, Jamal began, his voice echoing clearly through the grand space. Thank you all so much for gathering here tonight to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. We dreamed of building an incredible legacy alongside her brilliant visionary father. We wanted to conquer the entire world together. He paused dramatically, lowering his head for a brief moment to simulate profound grief. Tanya stood near the front row, watching her brother with a greedy, vicious smile. But life rarely goes exactly as we plan. Jamal continued, looking back up at the wealthy crowd. Over the past few months, many of you have noticed a tragic change in my beautiful wife. You have seen the severe memory lapses. You have witnessed the deep confusion. You saw her struggle tonight. A heavy, highly sympathetic murmur rippled through the grand ballroom. Guests nodded sadly, completely manipulated by his horrible lies. I remained seated at my table, keeping my head bowed, waiting patiently for his final fatal strike. It completely breaks my heart to announce this publicly, Jamal said, his voice cracking with fabricated emotion. But my beautiful wife is no longer well enough to lead her father's massive commercial real estate empire. Her severe cognitive decline has progressed far too rapidly. For the absolute safety of her father's legacy, and for the preservation of her own well-being, I am stepping in to take total unquestioned control of the entire estate, Jamal declared boldly. Nia has agreed to sign over the power of attorney tonight. I will manage the assets, and I will ensure she gets the intensive psychiatric help she so desperately requires. The sheer audacity of his public declaration was staggering. He was actively stealing my entire $30 million empire right in front of the mayor and the legacy board members, framing his massive theft as an act of profound, selfless love. Tanya clapped softly from the front row, encouraging the rest of the wealthy crowd to join her. A few polite, highly uncomfortable claps echoed through the grand ballroom. I slowly lifted my head. I looked past my husband, gazing directly through the massive glass doors that led to the front circular driveway. Through the pristine glass, I saw the bright flashing red and white lights of a large medical van pulling aggressively up the winding driveway. They had arrived in a heavy white vehicle, its tinted windows completely obscuring the equipment inside. Two men in dark medical scrubs immediately stepped out of the idling van, their expressions completely cold and entirely unbothered. They were ruthless mercenaries paid handsomely to perform a highly illegal abduction under the guise of urgent medical care. They carried leather belts, designed to completely immobilize a struggling patient. Jamal had paid them an astronomical fee to guarantee they would not ask a single question about my actual mental state. They were simply hired muscle ready to execute his incredibly cruel command without a single ounce of genuine hesitation or professional medical ethics. The corrupt private psychiatric transport team had arrived exactly on time. They had brought the heavy physical restraints, the canvas straps, and the strong chemical sedatives Jamal had secretly ordered. They were here to forcefully drag me out of my own beautiful home in a tight, restrictive straitjacket in front of everyone I knew. I turned my gaze back to the center of the room. Tanya was staring right at me. She pointed her finger subtly toward the flashing emergency lights visible through the grand glass doors. Her dark eyes burned with absolute victorious malice. She looked directly into my eyes and mouthed a single silent word: checkmate. I stared back at her, keeping my expression perfectly blank. My hands stopped trembling. My posture straightened slowly. The time for hiding was officially over. I took one final deep breath, letting the cold rush of power fill my lungs completely. The brutal game was finally shifting tonight. Jamal lowered his crystal champagne flute and picked up the silver microphone once again. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom felt incredibly suffocating. He looked directly at my table, his dark eyes filled with a terrifying, malicious gleam, masked perfectly by fake sorrow. He gestured toward me with a wide, welcoming sweep of his hand, playing his sinister role to absolute perfection. "Nia, my beautiful, brilliant wife," Jamal said, his voice echoing loudly through the massive space. "Please come join me up here. We need to handle this transition with the dignity and grace you absolutely deserve." The Legacy Board members are waiting to witness the official transfer of the power of attorney. It is time to let me carry this heavy burden for you before the medical team escorts you to get the vital help you need. He pulled a thick leather-bound folder from the inside pocket of his custom tuxedo. He opened it carefully, placing the fraudulent legal documents on the polished wooden podium. He uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen and laid it right next to the papers. He was setting the ultimate trap right in front of the Atlanta elite. He wanted me to sign away my $30 million commercial real estate empire under the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers, completely legitimizing his massive theft. Tanya stood up from her front row seat. She wore a disgustingly smug expression, my stolen diamond tennis necklace sparkling brightly against her sequined silver dress. She walked over to my table, aggressively grabbing my elbow to pull me upward. "Come on, Nia," she whispered harshly into my ear, digging her manicured nails deep into my skin. "Do not make a scene in front of the mayor. Just go sign the papers and get in the van quietly." I stood up slowly, deliberately, letting my knees buckle slightly to maintain the tragic illusion. I kept my hands trembling violently as I smoothed down my emerald green silk gown. I looked around the silent ballroom. The wealthy real estate moguls, the powerful politicians, and the elite socialites stared back at me with overwhelming, heart-wrenching pity. They truly believed they were watching the tragic end of a brilliant financial career. They thought my mind was completely shattered by severe early-onset dementia. I began the long, agonizing walk toward the center stage. I dragged my feet, keeping my head bowed in absolute defeat. I felt a supreme surge of power coursing through my veins. This was the exact moment I had painstakingly orchestrated. The grueling days of feigning illness, the agonizing hours of playing the submissive victim, all of it culminated in this single glorious revelation. I wanted them to feel the precise sting of my vengeance. Jamal watched my slow progress with a greedy, victorious smile playing on his handsome face. He thought he had entirely broken my spirit. I thought the heavy doses of haloperidol he had been secretly feeding me had finally eroded my sanity. He had absolutely no idea that I was completely lucid, fiercely intelligent, and heavily armed with devastating evidence. I reached the edge of the polished wooden stage. Jamal extended his hand down to me, playing the role of the devoted, supportive husband. I ignored his offered hand entirely. I gripped the smooth wooden handrail and pulled myself up the short flight of stairs. I walked slowly toward the podium, my hands shaking as I reached for the heavy gold pen. Jamal leaned in close, whispering sharply into my ear. "Sign the papers right now, Nia. The psychiatric transport team is waiting in the driveway. Do not embarrass me in front of these investors." I picked up the gold pen. I stared down at the fraudulent power of attorney documents. I saw the blank signature line waiting to steal my entire inheritance. I held the pen hovering just inches above the thick paper. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, completely captivated by the unfolding tragedy. Then everything changed. I dropped the heavy gold pen. It hit the wooden podium with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed violently through the silent room. My violently trembling hands instantly went completely still. I rolled my shoulders back, snapping my posture perfectly straight. The hunched, fragile demeanor evaporated into thin air. I lifted my chin high, radiating absolute, undeniable power. I turned my head slowly and looked directly into my husband's dark eyes. The fake, vacant expression I had worn for 2 days vanished entirely. My eyes turned to pure, unforgiving ice. Jamal stepped back instinctively, his arrogant smile faltering immediately. He looked down at my perfectly steady hands, completely unable to process the sudden, terrifying physical transformation. The heavy sympathetic murmurs rippling through the wealthy crowd died down instantly. The elite guests sat up straight in their expensive chairs, sensing the massive electric shift in the atmosphere. The pity in the room was rapidly replaced by profound shock. I reached out and grabbed the silver microphone, pulling it firmly from the heavy metal podium stand. I turned my back on Jamal and faced the massive crowd. My husband is absolutely right. My voice boomed through the grand ballroom, incredibly crisp, commanding, and perfectly articulate. There was no slurring, no hesitation, no confusion whatsoever. I am stepping away tonight. A collective gasp echoed across the massive room. The mayor leaned forward in his seat, his eyes wide. The legacy board members exchanged shocked, bewildered glances. Tanya dropped her crystal champagne glass. It shattered loudly against the marble floor, but nobody looked at her. Every single eye was locked firmly on me, completely mesmerized by the sudden resurrection of the woman they thought was broken. But I am not stepping away to a psychiatric hospital, I declared loudly, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. I am stepping away from a parasite. Complete pandemonium threatened to break out. Jamal's face turned a sickening shade of gray. His entire fraudulent narrative was crumbling into dust right in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. He realized instantly that the toxic drugs had not worked. He realized I had been faking the severe mental decline the entire time. The sheer panic setting into his features was incredibly satisfying. He was a cornered predator realizing he had suddenly become the prey. The opulent ballroom, which he had intended to use as the grand stage for my ultimate destruction, was rapidly transforming into an inescapable prison cell. Nia Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with intense raw panic. He tried to grab my arm to pull me away from the microphone. I smoothly sidestepped his aggressive grasp, keeping my fierce gaze locked entirely on the wealthy audience. Jamal turned toward the grand glass doors, laughing nervously to the confused crowd. She is having a severe manic episode. The intense stress is making her completely delusional. Medics, please come in here immediately. We need the heavy restraints right now. The heavy glass doors swung open. The two corrupt men in dark medical scrubs marched into the ballroom holding thick canvas straps. They moved aggressively toward the stage, fully intending to drag me out by brute force. Tanya cheered them on from the front row, desperate to salvage their malicious failing plan. Take her away, Tanya screamed, pointing her manicured finger directly at me. She is a massive danger to herself. The fake medics reached the edge of the stage, but before they could take a single step up the wooden stairs, a solid, impenetrable wall of dark suits materialized seemingly out of nowhere. My elite private security team, who had been blending seamlessly into the background all evening, moved with absolute lightning speed. They formed a tight, heavily armed barricade completely surrounding the front of the stage. They crossed their arms over their chests staring down the corrupt medics with cold, lethal precision. The medics stopped dead in their tracks, looking around nervously. They were hired thugs expecting an easy payday from a helpless, drugged woman. They were completely unprepared to face a highly trained elite security detail. They backed away slowly, raising their hands in total surrender. Jamal looked wildly around the room. He saw the federal agents in catering uniforms quietly blocking every single exit. He saw the undercover detectives standing near the open bar, watching his every panicked move. He realized he was completely trapped inside his own lavish anniversary gala. There was absolutely nowhere to run. What is going on here? Jamal demanded, his voice shaking with raw, unfiltered terror. He tried to rush the stage again, but two of my massive security guards stepped up, physically blocking him from coming anywhere near me. This is an absolute outrage, Tanya yelled, rushing frantically to her brother's side. You cannot do this, Nia. Jamal has the official medical paperwork. The only paperwork Jamal has is a fraudulent evaluation from a disgraced doctor he illegally bribed with $50,000, I stated clearly into the microphone. The wealthy crowd gasped again, the scandalous revelation sending shockwaves through the room. I looked down at Tanya, my eyes burning with fierce retribution. And you, Tanya, are currently wearing $80,000 worth of stolen diamonds around your neck. Diamonds you purchased with money siphoned directly from my corporate accounts. Tanya instinctively covered the sparkling necklace with her hands. her face flushing crimson with profound, inescapable embarrassment. The wealthy female board members sitting nearby looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. She shrank back, trying to hide behind Jamal. I turned my attention back to the massive crowd. I held up my left hand. Clasped tightly in my palm was a small black remote control. My loving, devoted husband told you all that my mind was rapidly decaying, I announced, projecting my voice to the farthest corners of the room. He claimed the immense pressure of managing my late father's legacy was actively destroying my cognitive health. He told you I needed urgent medical intervention. He was absolutely desperate to convince you that I was legally insane. I pointed the remote control directly toward the back of the room. Before I leave this stage, I said, my voice echoing with devastating finality, let us have a detailed look at the specific medicine my incredibly caring husband has been secretly giving me to cure my supposed illness. I pressed the button firmly. The grand crystal chandelier dimmed instantly, plunging the ballroom into a dramatic cinematic darkness. The soft whirring of heavy machinery echoed through the silent room. 3 massive high-definition projection screens began dropping slowly from the ornate ceiling, positioning themselves perfectly behind the stage. The glowing white screens illuminated the shocked faces of the elite guests. The soft velvet curtains framing the massive stage drew back automatically, revealing the flawless technological setup I had commissioned Elias to install yesterday afternoon. The pristine audio system crackled to life, sending a low, menacing hum vibrating through the expensive marble flooring. The high society guests leaned forward collectively, entirely captivated by the sudden dramatic shift in the evening's entertainment. They were expecting a sad farewell, but they were about to witness a spectacular execution. Jamal screamed in pure agony. He knew exactly what was coming next. He lunged violently toward the audiovisual control booth located in the back corner of the room, desperately trying to cut the power to the projectors. But 2 massive federal agents stepped directly into his path, grabbing him fiercely by the shoulders and slamming him hard against the wall. Watch closely, I commanded the room, pressing the play button on the remote control. The glorious, unvarnished truth is finally here for everyone to witness. The 3 massive projection screens flared to life with blinding brilliance. The crisp, high-definition 4,000-pixel resolution illuminated the grand ballroom, casting a sharp, unforgiving glow over the stunned faces of Atlanta high society. The hidden camera footage began to play. It showed the pristine, modern kitchen of my Buckhead mansion captured just days ago. The audio was impeccably clear, piped directly through the expensive surround sound system Jamal had proudly rented for this very anniversary gala. On the massive screens, my handsome, charismatic husband stood at the marble kitchen island. He was humming a cheerful rhythm and blues melody, his tailored suit jacket catching the warm kitchen lighting. The wealthy guests in the ballroom held their collective breath, completely mesmerized by the mundane domestic scene playing out before them. Then the digital Jamal reached deep into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the small, clear glass vial. A sharp collective intake of breath echoed across the silent ballroom. The camera angle was absolutely perfect, capturing every single detail of his sinister actions. The elite crowd watched in mounting horror as Jamal unscrewed the black cap. They watched his steady, unhesitating hands shake a heavy, lethal dusting of white powder directly into my portion of the creamy seafood pasta. The crisp audio caught the distinct scraping of the silver spoon against the porcelain plate as he expertly folded the rich sauce over the toxic chemical, masking the poison completely from sight. A low, chilling chuckle vibrated through the ballroom speakers. The sound was undeniably Jamal stripped of all his fake charm and societal polish. It was the dark, malicious laugh of a ruthless predator who believed he had successfully outsmarted his prey. She will never know, the digital Jamal whispered to the empty kitchen. The video paused, freezing on Jamal's smug, victorious smile. His larger-than-life face glared down at the horrified crowd from the 3 massive screens. The brutal, unvarnished truth was fully exposed for the entire city to witness. Absolute chaos erupted within the ballroom. The wealthy real estate moguls, the influential politicians, and the powerful legacy board members recoiled in pure, unadulterated disgust. Gasps of sheer terror and angry murmurs ripped through the elegant crowd. The mayor of Atlanta, a man who had proudly shaken Jamal's hand just an hour ago, stepped backward, his face pale with utter revulsion. The prominent female executives who had pitied me moments before now stared at my husband with fierce, burning rage. They realized they had been maliciously manipulated into participating in a cruel, orchestrated public execution. The pity they had felt for my supposed dementia transformed instantly into fierce, protective outrage. Near the edge of the stage, the two corrupt psychiatric medics stood completely paralyzed. The heavy canvas straps and restrictive leather belts hung uselessly from their hands. They looked up at the massive projection screens, then back down at Jamal, who was still pinned forcefully against the wall by the undercover federal agents. The hired thugs realized immediately that they had been violently weaponized in a highly illegal, premeditated criminal conspiracy. They dropped their medical restraints onto the polished marble floor, raising their hands defensively. They wanted absolutely no part of this catastrophic fallout. They knew they were staring down the barrel of severe federal charges, and their greedy ambition evaporated into raw, self-preserving fear. Jamal struggled violently against the two massive federal agents pinning him to the ornate wall. His custom-tailored tuxedo jacket ripped slightly at the shoulder seam as he thrashed. His charming, confident facade was completely shattered, replaced by the frantic, unhinged desperation of a trapped animal. "Turn it off!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. He thrashed his head wildly, glaring up at the audiovisual control booth located on the mezzanine level. "Cut the power right now. It is a fake video. It is a deep fake. She used artificial intelligence to frame me. Cut the screens." But the projection screens remained brightly illuminated, freezing his undeniable guilt in high definition. My elite private security team had locked down the audiovisual control room hours ago. They stood guard over the technicians, ensuring the brutal broadcast continued uninterrupted. Jamal was screaming at a wall. Nobody was listening to his pathetic lies anymore. His power was completely gone, stripped away by the undeniable visual evidence of his own cruel arrogance. In the midst of the swirling chaos, my sharp eyes scanned the wealthy crowd. The elite guests were actively backing away from the center of the room, creating a wide, empty circle around the stage and the pinned husband. But one person was moving aggressively against the tide: Tanya. My greedy, arrogant sister-in-law was desperately trying to slip away unnoticed. She kept her head down, using her sequined silver evening gown to blend into the shifting crowd. She kept her hands clasped tightly over her chest, desperately trying to conceal the $80,000 diamond tennis necklace she had brazenly stolen from my master bedroom safe. She was frantically pushing her way toward the rear service exit, hoping to escape the sinking ship before the legal authorities completely sealed the perimeter. She thought she could slip back into the Atlanta night and disappear with my stolen jewelry. I raised the silver microphone to my lips. My voice cut through the loud, chaotic clamor of the ballroom like a sharpened steel blade. "Do not let her leave," I commanded, pointing my finger directly at the fleeing woman in the silver dress. The grand spotlight, controlled flawlessly by my loyal team in the audiovisual booth, swung rapidly across the massive ballroom. A blinding beam of bright white light hit Tanya squarely in the back, illuminating her fleeing figure for everyone to see. She froze instantly, caught like a terrified deer in the headlights. The wealthy guests immediately parted around her, leaving her standing completely alone in the center of the bright spotlight. Tanya turned around slowly, her face contorted in a mask of pure trapped panic. She tried to offer a pathetic, trembling smile to the disgusted socialites surrounding her, but they glared back at her with absolute, unforgiving contempt. "My dear sister-in-law thinks she can quietly sneak out the back door," I announced, my voice echoing powerfully through the speakers. "She thinks she can run away while wearing the $80,000 diamond tennis necklace she stole from my private vault just yesterday afternoon." She paraded around my home, mocking my supposed mental decline, all while wearing diamonds purchased by my late father. Tanya instinctively clutched the sparkling necklace, her chest heaving with frantic breaths. "You are crazy," she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You gave this to me. You told me I could have it. You just forgot because your brain is sick." I smiled coldly from the stage, looking down at her pathetic, flailing attempt to maintain the broken illusion. "My brain has never been sharper," Tanya, I replied smoothly. But since you are so eager to discuss my failing memory, let us have a detailed look at some things I absolutely did not forget. Let us look at the precise financial records you and your brother tried so desperately to bury. Let us expose exactly why you needed to drug me into submission and steal my commercial real estate empire tonight. I pressed the small black remote control in my hand a second time. The massive projection screens behind me shifted instantly. The frozen image of Jamal pouring the toxic haloperidol vanished. In its place, a series of complex, highly detailed banking spreadsheets and forensic accounting ledgers flooded the bright screens. The undeniable, meticulously documented proof of their massive financial crimes was now displayed in massive glowing text for the entire city elite to read. The screens displayed the hidden offshore banking routing numbers. They showed the heavily forged signature documents Jamal had submitted to illegal shadow lenders to secure a $2 million loan against my midtown properties. The ledgers clearly highlighted the massive, dangerous underground gambling debts Jamal had accrued with the violent Miami betting syndicate. Then the screens shifted to a new set of damning financial records. The crowd gasped again as Tanya's failing luxury boutique was completely exposed. The spreadsheets detailed hundreds of thousands of dollars systematically siphoned from my corporate accounts, cleverly disguised as fake vendor payments and phantom consulting fees. The documents showed Tanya's massive unpaid commercial rent, her maxed-out business credit cards, and her impending federal tax evasion charges. They did not just want to lock me in a psychiatric ward, I announced to the captivated audience. They wanted to bleed my father's legacy entirely dry to save themselves from absolute financial ruin and dangerous criminal syndicates. They thought they could steal my $30 million estate and leave me rotting in a padded cell. I looked down at Tanya, who was now weeping hysterically under the bright spotlight, her fake high society persona entirely obliterated. I looked over at Jamal, who had stopped struggling against the federal agents, his head hanging down in total crushing defeat. His pristine reputation was permanently destroyed. They were completely ruined, stripped bare in front of the very people they had tried so hard to impress and manipulate. I lowered the silver microphone slightly, my eyes sweeping across the grand, silent ballroom. The elite guests watched me with profound respect and undeniable awe. I had survived a lethal coordinated attack on my life and my sanity, and I had emerged entirely victorious. I had flawlessly executed my absolute devastating retribution. I turned my gaze toward the undercover federal agents and the local detectives who were standing ready at the perimeter of the room. The trap was perfectly sprung. The evidence was irrefutable. The time for talking was officially over. Undercover officers, I commanded, my voice cold, steady, and echoing with absolute unstoppable power. Do your job. The room erupted into sudden decisive action. The undercover agents, who had been flawlessly disguised as catering staff and wealthy investors, immediately pulled their gold federal badges from their pockets. The glint of law enforcement hardware flashed brightly under the crystal chandeliers. Heavy tactical boots stomped loudly across the expensive marble flooring as the highly coordinated strike team moved in unison. The local Atlanta detectives stepped forward, their expressions hardened with professional determination. They marched directly toward Tanya, who was still frozen in the center of the bright spotlight, sobbing uncontrollably as her stolen diamonds caught the harsh light. Simultaneously, the two massive federal agents, who had kept Jamal pinned securely against the ornate wall, violently twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp, unmistakable clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed sharply through the grand ballroom. Jamal let out a final pathetic wail of absolute despair, his knees finally buckling under the crushing weight of his monumental failure. The elite crowd watched in stunned, captivated silence as the brutal reality of federal justice descended rapidly upon the two greedy parasites. My empire was finally completely cleansed. The heavy steel doors of the downtown Atlanta police precinct slammed shut, locking my treacherous ex-husband inside the cold, unforgiving reality of the criminal justice system. Less than 2 hours after my grand anniversary gala concluded, Jamal was sitting in a cramped, brightly lit interrogation room. His custom-tailored black tuxedo was torn at the shoulder, heavily wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. He sat across a dented metal table from two seasoned investigators, one local Atlanta detective and one federal agent from the Financial Crimes Unit. Jamal leaned forward, flashing his signature charismatic smile, desperately trying to deploy the smooth, silver-tongued charm that had always gotten him out of trouble in the past. He confidently spun a tragic, completely fabricated tale for the two silent investigators. He claimed that I was a deeply unstable woman suffering from a severe psychotic break. He insisted that the shocking video played at the gala was an elaborate, highly expensive deepfake created by artificial intelligence. He told them I was maliciously trying to frame him because he wanted to institutionalize me for my own personal safety. The two investigators sat perfectly still. They let him talk, allowing him to dig his own grave with every single arrogant lie. When Jamal finally finished his pathetic performance, the federal agent slowly opened a silver laptop resting on the metal table. He did not show Jamal the hidden camera video. Instead, he opened a specific audio file and pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio recording I had secretly captured from underneath my glass coffee table filled the small interrogation room. Jamal heard his own distinct voice echoing loudly off the concrete walls. He heard himself explicitly and boldly bribing Dr. Sterling with $50,000 in raw cash. He heard himself demanding a completely false, legally binding certificate of severe medical incompetence to use against his own wife. Jamal stopped breathing. The arrogant, confident posture instantly shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The fake smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His dark eyes darted wildly around the small room as his entire defense strategy collapsed into dust. The local detective leaned forward, resting his heavy arms on the table. He coldly informed Jamal that Dr. Sterling had been picked up at his private clinic exactly an hour ago. The disgraced psychiatrist was already sitting in another interrogation room down the hall, singing like a canary and fully cooperating with federal authorities to secure a lenient plea deal. Jamal slumped back in his hard metal chair, completely paralyzed by his monumental failure. He finally realized there was absolutely no way out. Right, next door, inside holding room B, Tanya was putting on a spectacular show of her very own. The glamorous, highly arrogant sister-in-law who had strutted through my Buckhead mansion wearing my stolen diamonds was now a complete and utter mess. Her expensive designer gown was ruined, and her heavy makeup was smeared darkly across her tear-stained cheeks. Two female federal agents sat across from her. They silently slid the forged commercial loan documents and the fake financial ledgers she had eagerly stolen from my floor safe directly across the metal table. They informed her that she was facing decades in federal prison for massive wire fraud and grand larceny. Tanya did not hesitate for a single fleeting second. The moment she realized her own luxurious life was officially over, she immediately turned on her older brother to save herself. She sobbed hysterically, completely throwing Jamal under the bus without a single ounce of familial loyalty. She confessed to the wire fraud, but aggressively claimed she was nothing but a terrified, helpless hostage to Jamal and his dangerous addictions. She told the federal agents everything about his massive, crippling debts to the violent Miami betting syndicate. She spilled every single intimate detail of his hidden offshore banking accounts, desperately hoping to secure a favorable plea deal. The two greedy siblings rapidly and mercilessly destroyed each other legally. There was zero loyalty left between the parasites. Only the pathetic, scrambling desperation of two criminals turning on one another to avoid the harshest prison sentences. Exactly 48 hours later, I walked confidently into the sleek, modern downtown boardroom of my commercial real estate firm. The massive glass table was surrounded by my late father's legacy board of directors. These were older, incredibly wealthy, highly skeptical men and women who had previously doubted my ability to lead the corporate empire. I sat at the head of the table wearing a sharp, tailored crimson power suit. I projected absolute strength, total transparency, and unyielding authority. I instructed my executive assistants to hand out thick, meticulously organized dossiers to every single board member. The detailed files contained the full, unvarnished truth of the events that had transpired over the past week. I explained clearly and precisely how I had single-handedly rooted out the bad actors who had attempted to illegally infiltrate and dismantle our company. I walked them through the temporary account freezes the establishment of the impenetrable, irrevocable blind trust, and my direct calculated cooperation with federal law enforcement. I demonstrated my ruthless, unwavering capability to protect our massive assets at absolutely any cost. I did not hide behind excuses, and I did not ask for their pity. I demanded their professional respect. The Legacy Board members were visibly astounded. They flipped through the flawless financial documentation, completely, thoroughly impressed by my aggressive, highly tactical maneuvers. They saw my father's fierce iron will burning brightly within me. Recognizing that I was an unstoppable force who had just saved their investments from catastrophic ruin, the board took an immediate unanimous vote. They officially decided to expand my executive CEO powers. I now had total unquestioned authority over the entire $30 million empire. The business was entirely mine to command. 2 weeks later, I took complete control of the public narrative. I sat down for an exclusive, highly publicized interview with a top-tier national business magazine. I controlled the narrative, completely ensuring the media framed my survival not as a tragic domestic dispute, but as a massive, empowering triumph of feminine intuition and absolute financial literacy. I spoke eloquently about the critical importance of protecting generational wealth. I talked about trusting your instincts when the people closest to you begin acting suspiciously. I urged women to understand their own finances and never surrender their power to anyone. The magazine article went viral within hours of publication. I became an instant icon in the Atlanta community and throughout the corporate world. I was hailed as a brilliant symbol of Black female empowerment and financial dominance. The local business leaders, who had attended my disastrous anniversary gala, now looked at me with profound reverence. They realized I was not a fragile victim, but a fierce strategist who could flawlessly destroy all of her enemies. I had taken a moment of intended public humiliation and expertly forged it into an unbreakable crown of public victory. I was entirely untouchable. A month quickly passed. The toxic chaos of my former marriage felt like a distant, fading nightmare. I was sitting comfortably at the large mahogany desk in my pristine home office, sipping a hot cup of dark coffee. My new executive assistant walked into the room carrying the morning stack of sorted mail. She placed the organized letters neatly on the corner of my desk and quietly excused herself. I sifted through the various corporate reports and charity gala invitations. Then one particular envelope stood out from the rest. It was made of cheap, thin brown paper. It was heavily stamped by the Fulton County Processing Facility. The return address indicated it was sent directly from the local detention center. It was a very desperate handwritten letter from my treacherous ex-husband Jamal, pleading for my immediate help. I picked up a sleek silver letter opener and sliced the cheap envelope open. I pulled out the lined yellow paper. Jamal's usually elegant handwriting was frantic, sloppy, and nearly illegible in certain places. I read his pathetic words with a very cold, highly amused smile. He was now writing from his small, highly restricted county jail cell, begging me for financial mercy. He told me that his public defender was completely useless, totally overwhelmed, and aggressively urging him to take a terrible, lengthy plea deal. He pathetically pleaded with me to quickly transfer just $50,000 so he could hire a competent private defense attorney. He actually had the monumental audacity to bring up our past love, reminding me of the happy years we had supposedly shared together before his gambling debts ruined him. He swore he was a changed man, utterly broken by the harsh reality of prison life, and desperately begging his powerful ex-wife for one single final lifeline to save his completely ruined future. The ultimate staggering audacity of his incredibly selfish request was truly almost comical. I stood up slowly from my heavy mahogany desk, holding the cheap yellow paper loosely between my manicured fingers. I walked across the plush carpet of my pristine home office, toward the massive custom-built stone fireplace, dominating the far wall. The bright orange flames crackled and hissed softly against the dark wood, casting a warm, inviting glow across the quiet room. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the man rotting inside that tiny county jail cell. I did not feel any lingering sorrow for the 4 years of marriage I had completely erased from my life. Surprisingly, I did not even feel any residual anger. All the fierce burning rage that had fueled my meticulous investigation had completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound crystalline sense of absolute peace. I held Jamal's desperate pleading letter over the open flames. I opened my hand. I watched in total silence as the cheap paper fluttered downward into the searing heat. The edges curled and blackened instantly. The pathetic, frantic words of a broken, defeated predator turned rapidly into fragile gray ash and floated up the dark chimney, disappearing forever. I turned my back on the bright fire, completely closing the heavy door on his pathetic existence. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the fresh, clean air fill my completely unburdened lungs forever. The federal justice system had moved with swift, merciless efficiency. During the highly publicized criminal trial, the overwhelming mountain of undeniable evidence left absolutely no room for any defense strategy. Jamal was officially sentenced to a mandatory 15 years in a maximum security federal prison for attempted poisoning, grand larceny, and massive wire fraud. He would spend the remainder of his youth locked inside a tiny concrete box, entirely stripped of the luxurious high society lifestyle he had so desperately tried to steal. Tanya did not fare much better. Despite her hysterical attempts to blame her older brother for absolutely everything, the federal judge saw right through her greedy facade. She was sentenced to 5 hard years in federal prison for her active participation in the financial conspiracy. But the most satisfying consequence of her spectacular downfall was the ultimate fate of her bankrupt fashion boutique. After the bank officially foreclosed on her heavily indebted commercial lease, my investment firm swooped in and purchased the building outright. I completely gutted her flashy, arrogant store. I fully funded and transformed the massive space into a state-of-the-art community outreach center specifically designed to provide free financial literacy programs and essential business grants to young, ambitious Black female entrepreneurs in Atlanta. I proudly turned her hollow monument to vanity into a powerful, thriving engine for genuine community growth. It stands today as a permanent, beautifully constructed reminder that absolute greed will always inevitably destroy the very people who so foolishly attempt to wield it. Their spectacular failure became the essential foundation for dozens of brilliant young women to successfully build their own entirely untouchable financial legacies. I walked out of my home office and moved gracefully toward the grand glass doors of my newly renovated penthouse suite. I had completely sold the Buckhead mansion, shedding the heavy toxic memories of my former marriage, and purchased the absolute highest, most exclusive penthouse overlooking the entire glittering city of Atlanta. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out onto the massive, sweeping balcony. The cool, crisp evening air washed over my face. The sprawling, vibrant city lights sparkled brilliantly against the dark velvet sky, a vast, undeniable empire of endless possibility stretching out directly beneath my feet. I rested my hands on the cool glass railing. Resting heavily against my collarbone, catching the ambient city light, with breathtaking brilliance, was the $80,000 diamond tennis necklace Tanya had so foolishly tried to steal. The pristine, glittering stones felt like a cold, beautiful armor. In my right hand, I held a delicate crystal glass, filled with an incredibly rare vintage Cabernet. The rich dark red wine was absolutely pristine, perfectly chilled, and entirely unpoisoned. I brought the thin rim of the crystal glass to my lips and took a long, deeply satisfying sip. The complex, bold flavors danced across my tongue, tasting remarkably like absolute freedom. I looked out over the glowing Atlanta skyline, reflecting deeply on the brutal, transformative journey of the past 6 months. When my treacherous husband had first sprinkled that toxic white powder into my food, he had fully expected me to quietly consume it. He had expected me to slowly lose my mind to doubt my own reality and to willingly hand over the keys to my late father's legacy. He had deeply underestimated the sheer unbreakable fortitude of the woman he married. I completely refused to be a helpless victim in his twisted narrative. I aggressively refused to be gaslit, manipulated, or intimidated into a quiet, institutionalized submission. Instead of panicking, I weaponized my own silence. I used my sharp, highly analytical intellect as my absolute greatest weapon, flawlessly dismantling his entire criminal operation from the inside out. I learned the most vital lesson a powerful woman can ever master. You must always trust your deepest primal instincts. When the perfectly constructed facade of your reality begins to slip, you do not doubt your own eyes. You gather your evidence, you protect your peace with ruthless, unapologetic aggression, and you strike back with devastating, calculated precision. Jamal thought he could break me down and steal my crown. Instead, he simply taught me how to wield my immense power without a single ounce of hesitation. I took another slow, luxurious sip of my perfect wine. The cool evening breeze ruffled the green silk of my dress. I smiled a slow, fiercely triumphant smile into the glittering, endless Atlanta night, knowing with absolute, unshakable certainty that the sweetest, most devastating revenge of all is unbothered, untouchable success. The dark screen fades to black on my absolute, radiant and purely triumphant smile.